Okay, let's try this again. And let's hope that this time the internet doesn't randomly go out and then fuck us fuck us over again.
And here's to the beginning.
I'll drink to that.
Why, Johnny Ringo.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
I know exactly what I'm doing, and I can change it at any time.
I'm your huckleberry.
An outlaw loose and running came the whisper from each lip, and he's here to do some business with the big iron on his hip.
Incoming the Rambling Podcast, with your hosts, Conway Titty, and Stoney Robbins.
Howdy, hey, cowpokes, and welcome back to another episode of the Ramblin' Podcast. I'm your host, Conway Titty. Joined with me always is
Stoney Robbins.
the Stoneth of Robinson is here in the building with us. He's technically in the building. He's like two doors away from me. And sometimes it's really fun when we do these episodes, or even just like during streams. I can hear him, his mic will like cut out, but I can hear him screaming or laughing chaotically throughout the house. And I wish that's something I could be able to recreate for you guys. But it is the funniest, just echoing down the hallway of like giggle fest or screaming. And it's hilarious.
No kidding.
Yeah. You can hear me sometimes, but I can hear you quite often. You get loud and fun, and I think that's hilarious. Like I said, I wish I could recreate that for the audience, but can't. So this is what you get instead.
Well, they could. I'd have to just put my microphone in a different corner.
Super different, just at a distance, cackle laughing.
Yeah.
With like echoes.
Which is weird because like I'd have to have like two microphones because this one picks up
Dude,
my voice at a normal volume. Like I'm
you
just
would,
talking at
yeah,
a normal audible level right now, but if I
yeah.
start screaming, it completely
It
cuts
cuts
out because
off,
I have
yeah,
a noise suppression software on.
yeah. And it sucks because like in the software we're used to, we can't add any like filters or anything that I normally have during like our stream sessions. Um, But this will do. We're doing what we can, guys, and we're bringing it to you every week, trying to entertain you guys and talk about topics that are fun and crazy. And it is finally fall. It's this spooky season, Halloweeny season. The leaves are changing and there's a crunch crisp in the air, and I'm loving it. I'm so over summer. Granted, the weather is still, 95 degrees Fahrenheit here. But we did get a touch of fall a couple weeks ago with a little 50 degrees Fahrenheit. I really did enjoy that. I was like, this is great. But now it's still super hot, and I'm waiting for the moment that we get it's crispy. It's cool. It's just it's a nice weather. It's the best season. I enjoy winter, but I think fall, winter, spring, and like summer is dead last. I'm over these 110-degree days. I don't know why people like
Well, it
it.
hasn't been 110 for a while. It's only like
Well,
95 right
yeah, but
now.
it's
So
still like,
let's not oversell it too hard
no,
now.
I meant for the summer. Like that's why summer sucks, is because it's like
Yeah.
110, and
But
it's
summer's
gross.
over.
I know.
And now we're getting into actual fall, which for us that means instead of 110, now it's only like 80s, 90s, and gradually will fall off, and like it'll still probably be like 70 by the time mid-November rolls around.
No, I don't think so. I think we're gonna.
Watch, just watch,
Mm,
just watch.
I like the all of a sudden it's 30 degrees.
Well,
I think that's the
it's
difference.
October in a few days, and it's still 95. So
Well, that's how it always is. What I'm saying is, like, I love the drastic shift that happens a lot where it's like, "Oh my god, it's super hot," and then, like, a week later, it's almost snowing. It's just such a and then it just stays like that. Such a huge shift. I love it. I think it's definitely my favorite, season, and, we talked about how Halloween and, like, this October seasonal aspect, it would be so weird not with, like, a cool, crisp weather. Like, maybe, like, a winter it could pass, but, like, I can't imagine Halloween in weather that's, like, summer, where it's a summer season. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't really pair well, you know?
after living on the East Coast, I will tell you, when it's like October and it's like 40 degrees for Halloween, it's great. It's
I
really
like I
great.
like when we get, like, a nice little fall with it, but that's what I'm saying, is, like, I couldn't imagine any season, like, if Halloween was paired with a different month. I just don't it just doesn't it's the colors and the scheme of things and the
Yeah, but
tones.
the
It
thing
just
that I'm telling
pairs
you
so well.
is if you think it's great now, you should see it, like, on the East Coast where there's
Well,
actual seasons
yeah, yeah,
instead
where
of
it's actually, like,
summer, winter, because that's
no,
all we have
I
where
know,
we're at is
I
summer or
know.
winter. There's
I
no in between.
know, and I love the whole Vermont and Maine and Connecticut foliage, maps where it shows, like, the peak hours or the peak days and weeks of, like,
Oh,
when the
yeah, see, I
colors
don't
are
even know
first and
that much into it.
oh,
I'm just talking about, like, I mean, I lived in Virginia for enough time that, like,
no, I
over
know too, but I'm
seasons.
talking about, like, that is a huge thing that people do watch when they, like, go vacation up there and do some things. They watch the foliage maps because they wanna, get there during, like, the peak time where the colors are red and
Yeah,
orange.
I just
Oh,
miss
I
real
love it.
fall.
I
Like,
know.
I miss,
We get,
like
like, a week of it, and then it goes to winter, I'm pretty
I
sure. That's
miss,
that's
like,
usually how it
East
works.
Coast fall because it lasts for, like, a solid month, month and a half, and
Yeah.
then it gradually goes from being, only 90s roughly, but, like, more humidity to, "Hey, humidity's gone, it's kinda dry out. Oh, look at that, the weather's going down." It's, like, 60s, 40s, and it, like, kind of climbs its way down, and then it's like, "Oh, it's wintertime," so now it's, like, 30 to 0 degrees depending
Yeah.
on how
We
bad the weather is.
we get a
I miss
summer
having seasons.
we get a summer, 1 week of fall, immediate winter, and then, like, a week of spring, and then back to
Well,
heat summers.
I
It
will say
sucks.
we get about a month of spring, and the only reason I know that is because, like, as soon as
Sometimes
March
it'll freeze.
starts,
It
it goes
freezes and
from
then snows and
35
hot.
degrees at the beginning of March to then it's like,
Fahrenheit,
"Oh, it's
yeah.
60 outside now, so you can go back to t-shirt." I remember that
Yeah.
because I remember going from off-season weightlifting to
Oh
baseball,
my
and as
god, you don't
soon
gotta
as it started,
explain.
as soon as the weather started, it
Stoney
was
getting in
great.
his I gotta explain every detail of my life right now with seasons. That's how he remembers most of his life is just by
Well,
the
that's
seasons.
the only way I can remember things.
But yeah, I was making sure to say Fahrenheit too for all the international listeners. I wanna make sure that, we are, accommodating. That's for the international people out there listening to us talk about, weather in the bumfuck part of states.
Anyway, so, with that 10-minute intro we got going.
Um, Today's topic is all about horror films, movies. Obviously you can tell by the fucking title of when you clicked on it, you obviously can see that it's right there. This is a semi-scripted episode. I wanted to do a little like brief history about horror movies and like the awards kind of not being provided. And just wanted to have a nice little background for you guys. And then towards the end of the episode, Stoney and I are going to talk about our favorite horror films in no particular order. We just wanted to talk about some that we really just love to watch over and over. So if you don't want to listen to any of the like history part, feel free to skip to the end. We'll have that. Um, but as just like we did last week when we talked about our sexual deviance of history with Mozart, that was a fully scripted episode, and I think Stoney and I do enjoy those because it does give us some sort of structure when we're talking, um, and allows us to kind of just teach you guys as well. Like sometimes we learn on each episode just along with you guys, but it's really nice to also talk about a topic that we're quite knowledgeable about and also reading from other people's brilliant article works or books and things like that. And I just really like the dynamic of being able to have an option of like some episodes where just whatever freehand thoughts that go into our brains and then other parts are super constructed and this one's a little bit right in the middle.
We know you guys like listening to these more structured episodes like this, and we figured why not go ahead and do one about something close to the time because it's October, Halloween's coming up soon, and we figured why don't we give you guys a nice little brief kind of history about horror and all the bullshit that goes along with it and something of that sort.
And that's the best part is that not only are they fun for us, but the fact that you guys actually enjoy them makes it more uh palatable for us. So it doesn't feel like we are script reading in a sense. It's we're working on not only just reading in general, but being able to like read towards an audience, which is something I felt like I've done quite a bit, but Stoney's getting used to as well. And it's nice to see the growth of like I said, we're on episode 43 and the podcast as a whole. has grown so much compared to the very first episode. And even just like first episode when we did no cams, and it was only just voice. And I really like the dynamic of everything and just adding little elements to keep the podcast episodes entertaining, but also a nice teachable moments. Like anytime we can all as a society just learn something, even if it's like a fun fact. It's great. As always, we like to give our sources for every kind of research topic that we have. Some of them are like articles, some of them are book passages that we are reading directly from. We did not write a lot of this. I just like to do a little disclaimer. So, with that being said, today's sources are the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary, the New York Film Academy, a horror snubs article by Kelsey Christine McConnell, and a horror movies article by Lloyd Farley. They both have like really long article names, so I just kind of summed it up, but articles by them. And this will allow us to, like I said, sound more coherent. And it's not like we're, for example, the last podcast on the left where they read like 6 books in a week and then type an entire script. We're not that in depth, but it's nice to be able to reiterate some really fun knowledge that I've researched to be able to present to not only you, but to Stoney. With that being said, now that you guys have our sources, let's go ahead and get right into it, shall we, Stoney?
Yes, we shall.
All right. Is defined as the painful and intense fear, dread, or dismay, an intense aversion or repugnance, repulsive, horrible, or dismissal quality or character. Today, we are going to be teaching a brief history of horror films, one of the worst genres to ever grace the screen, or so the critics say. Terrifying people through stories, it's been a pastime of humans since antiquity, with a large swath of folklore centered around things that go bump in the night, particularly supernatural going ons or anything related to and exploring our innate fear of death. With such a strong precedence in literature and oral history, it's no surprise that the first horror movie was quick to get its feet under the table soon after the advent of cinema. Over the course of a century, film horror has gone through many peaks and troughs, leading us into somewhat a contentious period we find ourselves in today. The history of horror as a film genre begins with, as many things in cinema history, the works of George Méliès. Just a few years after the first filmmakers emerged in the mid 1890s, Méliès created Les Moines du Diable, sometimes known in English as The Haunted Castle or The House of the Devil in 1896. And it is widely believed to be the first horror movie ever. This 3-minute film is complete with cauldrons, animated skeletons, ghosts, transforming bats, and ultimately an incarnation of the devil. While not intended to be scary, more wondrous was Méliès's MO. It was the first example of a film, only just discovered in 1977, but it was to include the supernatural and set a precedent for what was to come. Where the genre will go over the next 100 years is anyone's guess, but sometimes it's good to look back on the long road we traveled to get to this point.
After the first horror movie, sometime between 1900 and 1920, an influx of supernatural themed films followed. Many filmmakers, most of whom still trying to find their feet in the new genre, turned to literature classics as source material. The first adaptation of Frankenstein was released by Edison Studios in the early days, as well as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and The Werewolf, now both lost to the fog of time. Things were starting to roll at this point as we moved on. Now entering its golden age, horror films were widely considered to be the finest era of the genre. The 2 decades between the 1920s and 1930s saw many classics being produced and can be neatly divided down the middle to create a separation between the silent classics and the talkies. On the silent side of the line, you've got monumental titles such as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in 1920 and Nosferatu in 1922.
Which
The first
we absolutely love Nosferatu. I think it's one of the best, and I get why it's a classic.
Yeah, the first time I ever heard about Nosferatu was actually in SpongeBob, of all places. And like the very first episode, there's a throwaway bit at the very end of the episode with like Nosferatu clicking a light switch up and down.
Oh, it's
And
the hash slinging slasher episode.
yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, Nosferatu.
Yep.
And I think that's as just an art and animation in general, I think that's so cool that even just that small SpongeBob clip was like such a introduction to a lot of people to a 1920s black and white horror film. Even if it was just that small part, it's like maybe kids wouldn't have known that any other way. Like for me, I knew about Nosferatu, but for you, that was like your way of like, oh, that's like from this, and then now you compare it to now, and it's like, oh, that's where you learned it from. I think that's cool that SpongeBob did a little homage to that, even if it's like I said, something that's from the 20s and it's 2000, 6, you know?
These were the first movies to really make an attempt to unsettle their audience. Once the silent era gave way to the technological process, we had a glut of incredible movies that paved the way for generations to come, particularly in the field of monster movies. Think of the second iteration of Frankenstein in 1931, The Mummy in 1932, or the first color adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1931. The 30s also marked the first time that the word horror was used to describe the genre. Previously, it was really just romance melodrama with a dark element. And it also saw the first horror stars being born. Bela Lugosi was arguably the first to specialize solely in the genre. And as well as unnerving its viewers, the genre was starting to worry the general public at this point, with heavy censoring and public outcry becoming common with each release. Freaks in 1932 is a good example of a movie that was so shocking at the time, it got cut extensively, with the original version now nowhere to be found. Director Todd Browning, who had previously created the aforementioned and wildly successful Dracula, saw his career flounder at the hands of this controversy. The shock value of Freaks is one of the few that has aged well up until the present day and is still highly disturbing to watch.
Which, when you think about it, though, it seems like anything horror based or scandalous during this time would be just so cut. It makes sense. I mean, it still happened throughout. I mean, it still happens today, but it's not as bad. But I would say horror as a genre in general, genre in general, as a genre in general, um, has had a good amount of like people just thinking, especially when it gets into like demonic stuff, thinking it's just the worst type of art in the entire world. And they don't even look at it as an actual movie anymore. And it kind of goes, hand in hand with the whole satanic panic in the 80s style and everything just being devil this, devil that. And it all depends on, the environment, the religious views, the what's going on at the time during this politically as well. And it's so fascinating that obviously some horror film that's not even as crazy as some are now, they would shit their pants to see some of the ones that are available to watch now, you know what I mean? Like, it's so weird that because of someone who was already so successful in the industry puts out one movie, they're so scared that their entire career and reputation is tainted and gone, and it's insane.
After Freaks was banned for 30 years in the country that really came into its own during this period, Great Britain. This is known as the Atomic Years of Horror. The Hammer Horror Company, while founded in 1934, only started to turn prolific during the 50s, but when it did, it was near global dominance thanks to a lucrative distribution deal with Warner and a few other US studios. Once again, it was adaptations like Frankenstein, Dracula, and The Mummy that put the company squarely on the map, followed by a slew of psychological thrillers and TV shows. And of course, you can't mention British horror without paying respects to Alfred Hitchcock, who single-handedly is responsible for establishing the slasher genre, which we'll see a lot of as we travel further forward in time. Another hallmark of the 1940s and 1950s era of horror came as the product of the times. With war ravaging Europe and fears of nuclear fallout running rampant, it's of little surprise that horror began to feature antagonists that were less supernatural in nature. Radioactive mutation became a common theme, as in The Incredible Shrinking Man or Godzilla, as did the fear of invasion with The War of the Worlds and When Worlds Collide, both big hits in 1953. The latter marked the earliest rumblings of the disaster movie genre, but it would be a couple more decades before that would get into full swing.
And this is where horror as a as genre shifts into more of, instead of monsters or I mean, we technically aren't really into the like religious demonic things just entirely yet. They're
Yeah, we
really
couldn't we
playing
couldn't do anything at that time when it comes to religion and stuff like that because that was still one of those things that was like
really
seriously
yeah.
taboo to talk about.
At this time, they're really honing in to the realistic fears of this era, like wars being the main thing, and like the radioactive mutation. That's such a huge common theme.
Yeah, you got
With
Swamp Thing,
yeah,
stuff like that.
with most of the um films in general. Like a lot of the films were even just war based movies, even if they weren't horror.
Yeah, there's
And
a lot of war, and
this
then
is such a
that's like even
common
even in even in like things like comic books and stuff like that because of the time that it
yeah,
was,
yeah,
they were putting like
exactly.
Superman
Superman
in versus the
fighting.
Nazis,
Yeah,
and it's like
yeah,
what?
yeah, but it just that became, like I said, this little era is mainly on a realistic fear that you could be bombed or a nuke could blow up. The whole Oppenheimer movie aspect with it, like it's that honed in. This it would be perfect in the 40s and 50s, like that's it's just such a kind of crazy fear tactic as well, is because not only
100%. A lot of it was fear mongering. That's what
yes,
most of it
yes,
was.
yes. Because not only were they just putting out horror films, but they were really, like I said, leaning into people's already huge,
Their deep
huge
seated
fear.
fears.
Yes, exactly, and then seeing what this could look like if something blew up. You're gonna have
Well,
all
yeah,
these
around this is
radioactive
also
people and food and
a little bit further into this. Not only do you just have stuff like horror movies and stuff, but it talked about TV shows and stuff, and that's also where you start seeing shows like The Twilight Zone pop up.
yes,
Because all the
yeah.
original Twilight Zone episodes are in black and white, so this is in this time period.
Yeah, it's in one of those of a possibility of scenarios that, like the fear of this might happen, or this might happen. So if this happens, this is what could happen to the human race. We all could be, melting from the skin and all the food's poisoned. The water's disgusting, like it's just a fascinating shift from like just made up monsters. That's what people were genuinely scared of. And now it's like, oh no, war. War is realistic. Because it was happening, it just happened or it was happening during this time. Just kind of depends on, like I said, when a lot of these or this art was created. So, with that, in comes what most refer to as the gimmicky years, which includes like 3D glasses and electric buzzers installed into theater seats. There was also paid stooges in the audience screaming and pretending to faint. So, everything and anything was tried during the 50s and 60s in an attempt to further scare cinema audiences, which I find absolutely just crazy, but I get how people could fall for that stuff during this time. It's not like they had, like I said, the internet or multiple videos going around of people, they don't understand the scam. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, the like the buzzers and seats and stuff like that. I can only imagine how obnoxious
Like I
those
said,
were.
the extra actors, it's kind of like with the the music, the big music people, for example, like
Oh
the
yeah,
girls
back in
painting
yeah.
with Elvis and different things. Like it's just so weird because it's all a ploy and city,
That's capitalism at
Yeah,
work right
it's
there.
crazy. It's crazy. The penchant for interactivity spilled over into other genres during this period, but quickly died down in part due to the massive amount of expenses involved. I couldn't imagine how much you got paid as a actor to be in these environments, throwing up because you're so scared. And then that makes other people be like, "Oh my god, this movie is so genuinely terrifying." So yeah, I could imagine how fucking expensive this shit gets. For horror, in particular, this gave way to the opposite end of the spectrum, incredibly low budget productions. From the late 60s onwards, so insatiable was the American appetite for gore that slasher films produced for well under $1 million took hold and were churned out by volume. This is where the quantity over quality really comes into play, and where I think it just took a giant nosedive.
Well, it was also, I mean, it's not like how it is nowadays, where if you want to watch something, you can watch it from home. Back then,
Yeah,
that's all they
you're
had were
and then you're
the
like, "This
movies,
sucks, this
and
sucks,
you would
horror
watch
sucks."
it
Yeah,
multiple times. Like people would go see the
yeah.
same movie over and over again because that's
Depending if
all
it
they
was
had to
good,
do.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
because there's nothing to do at that time. But what are you gonna do? Read a book?
exactly. That's not to say that there weren't some masterpieces produced during this time, though. George A. Romero emerged triumphant and kickstarted zombie movies in this period, having produced Night of the Living Dead in 1968 with just over $100,000 in production, like costs, right? To be able to make that film, which is crazy.
But that's also 100 grand in 1968 money,
But
which
but it then went on to gross $30 million in 68.
yeah, in
$30 million
1968,
in
$30 million
68.
in 1960.
That's
That's like
crazy.
that would be like having $100 million.
Yeah, that's crazy. Bar billionaire.
Yeah.
Eventually, all hell breaks loose and classics emerge with a vengeance. A cult was the flavor of the day between the 70s and 80s, particularly when it came to houses and kids being possessed by the devil. The reason for this cultural obsession with religious evil during this period could fill an entire article on its own, so we're not going to talk about that. So we're going to bring it back into mainly just the cinema because if we talk about, like I said, the 80s and 70s satanic panics and the fucking Dungeons and Dragons, anything that had to do with witchcraft, like that's a whole episode Stone and I think we should do some other time. We can basically boil down the trend to two horror milestones. 1973's The Exorcist and 1976's The Omen. Supernatural horror was very much back in vogue and harking back to its cinematic origins, and literature once again became the source material. This time, however, it wasn't a Victorian author whose work had fallen out of copyright, but a gentleman named Stephen King.
Dun dun dun.
Good old Stephen King. Oh,
Okay.
for how much, if you guys love or hate Stephen King, you got to give it to him. That dude has written some crazy ass books and numerous amounts of horror that has changed an entire genre. It really has. Without Stephen King's writings, I don't think horror would be what it is today. As crazy and as detailed and in
I
depth
mean,
and
he's
long,
he
long.
definitely is one of the pioneers of modern horror.
Yeah, for sure. Carrie in 1976 stormed the gates. The Shining in 1980 finished the siege. With 1982's Supernatural Fright Fest, Poltergeist following soon afterward. That movie actually scared me to death as a kid. I genuinely was so terrified of the little girl touching the TV. And, at this time too, my family still had one of those big box static TVs. So I was always scared that if I touched it, I would get sucked into the TV and become a TV ghost that could only speak through radios and static waves. And that genuinely was like scary. Until this day, it still holds up pretty well. A lot of these still hold up. With these hallmarks in the history of horror now firmly established, the foundations were laid for the first slashers to emerge on the big screens. If there's one trope that defines the 80s, it's the slasher format. A relentless antagonist hunting down and killing a bunch of kids in ever increasing inventive ways, one by one. These are my favorite horror movies. I love the aesthetics of it. I love the themes of it. I think even we talked about this, even with the trillion sequels that a lot of these have that go to like 5 or 6 movies, I still think they're great. I still think this genre of film is so nice because not only are they using practical effects and it's not a lot of CGI. Some of them have CGI, don't get me wrong, and we talk about that.
But yeah,
Uh,
definitely out of a
but the
subgenre.
practical effects
Yeah.
are so nice. I love a good practical effect. This era arguably was kicked off by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974. The output became prolific over the next decade. For every 10 generic slashers, however, there was one flick that would end up becoming a cult classic, even if critical success was mixed at the time. Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street are the most prominent examples, which became so successful that they have spawned their own long-running franchises, which was the first time in history that the genre had multiple sequels become a thing. And like not only like a thing, but also as popular as the first ones. Which is like crazy what we talked about. The fact that, you know, Jason that fucking Friday the 13th has a Jason X and
Yeah.
The Halloween has a Halloween 20 years later, and now they have a Halloween that just came out with Jamie Lee Curtis again.
Halloween H2O.
2-0, yeah, yeah. And then
H2O.
my favorite, I think we discussed this, is it's not on our list, but one of my favorites of the crossovers was Jason versus Freddy. The
Yeah.
crossovers. I love
Freddy
that
versus
they
Jason's
yeah,
good.
Freddy versus Jason. They did the whole crossovers in the mix. I think that's so great and such a brilliant way to combine
It's such a
two
weird
It's
it's such
great
a
though.
weird crossover though.
But think
Because
about it.
like
It
the
doesn't
whole
work on
thing
any
is like
other
it makes no sense. Like I hate you, you hate me. Let's fight about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
but also the thing is like it doesn't work on any other genre. It works
Yeah.
here,
It would
it
never work on
fucking
anything
works.
else.
No,
Yeah.
it works. You can't have just a comedy special, like an actual comedy movie or a rom-com put together and you're like, "Oh yeah,
Big
that makes
Daddy
sense."
meets Mr. Deeds.
Yeah, it just doesn't. Like, this makes sense in the horror genre, and I love it because the way they wrote that too is we're gonna after I'm gonna go watch Freddy versus Jason again. But it's written so well that it makes sense because they're both in a realm of horror type slasher films, all because of a slasher genre. Like I said, the 80s are the best. The 80s slashers are the best. Plenty of imitators and ripoffs followed, particularly in the holiday theme department. Some were a lot better than others, as the genre descended to its most kitschy. Similar to the first horror movie, these films were not intended to scare, but entertain. And boy, did they. I find them so entertaining because of the practical effects. I find, we talked about how, like, in, like, The Lost Boys, even, granted, the 80s is such a weird time in movies because they're also working with, like, new camera angles, and some of them look really goofy, some of them look good, but my best example is in The Lost Boys when the vampires are flying over to, like, kill a victim, it's that POV cam right above the actor, and the actor just has to act like there's this giant monster that's about to eat them, and then all of a sudden they're getting, like, strung up by a rope and moved out of frame, and it's just, like, it looks so fake, but it's also like said, "Oh, it's the '80s, so that makes sense." And I just love the experimentation that they had during this time, and I think that's what makes them really fun because I know Quentin Tarantino, obviously very famous movie director, um, hates the '80s films. He thinks that's the worst genre or worst era of movies in general. And I find that fascinating because it's like I fucking love '80s movies. I don't care how
Yeah,
stupid
but
they are.
I mean, you can see where he's coming from, I'm
Yeah,
sure, because
yeah.
like in the 80s, they had too good of effects that things started to look real for at that time.
And then
But
some
if
look
you
really
tried to
fake.
look at it now, most of it looks like dog shit,
Yeah,
and it
which
just
is what we get
doesn't hold up
into,
a lot of it.
which is right on, right where we're about to jump into, this next little weird time in I would say movies in general, but especially in the horror films.
Suffering from exhaustion in the wake of 1,000 formulaic slasher movies and their sequels, the genre lost steam as it moved into the 1990s. The advent of computer generated special effects brought with it a number of lackluster CGI monster titles that did little to revive the genre, such as Anaconda in 1997 and Deep Rising in 1998.
To be
But
fair to be fair, Anaconda was absolutely terrifying to me as a child. I also have a giant fear of snakes anyways, so to see these, like, freaking ice cube wrapped around this, like, 100-foot thick-ass snake, looks like he's getting actually eaten, is insane. You watch Anaconda now, you're like, "This ain't fucking real. That don't look real at all," but at the time, it looked crazy. Looked
well, yeah,
crazy
and also back then that was like the best CGI it could do, and
and
nobody
that's
knew
all we
better,
knew. Yeah,
so
exactly.
everyone thought, "Wow, that looks really cool."
Amazing, give him an award.
Yeah. Peter Jackson's early foray into filmmaking saw him taking the splatter subgenre to ridiculous extremes with Braindead in 1992 and Wes Craven's slasher parody Scream in 1996. They were met globally with overwhelming success. The genre as a whole limped on without much fanfare into the 2000s, except for a few box office successes. The zombie subgenre, however, sprang back into unalive.
Unlive. Unlive, pun intended.
During this decade, arguably spurred on by the unprecedented success of Max Brooks's novel World War Z, later becoming a film in its own right. The movie adaptation of Resident Evil in 2002 was among the first of the new wave, followed swiftly by 28 Days Later, only a few months later. Dawn of the Dead in 2004, Land of the Dead in 2005, I Am Legend in 2007, and Zombieland in 2009. And obviously, we can't forget the worldwide success of the Walking Dead TV show. Not only were zombie type movies extremely popular during this time, but so were spoof movies. The entire Scary Movie franchise, Shaun of the Dead, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, and numerous others were thrown into the limelight, making the horror industry very laughable. It seemed that horror films were just not that scary anymore.
This we grew up definitely during this time consuming a lot of these movies and a lot of these
Well, yeah, this was a lot of our formative years. Where like
Yeah,
the early to the late 2000s were
yeah,
that's a 10-year block that was very formulative for both of
and
us.
I am not a big fan of zombie anything. I think the Resident Evils hold up, and I think the 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later holds up, but, like, everything else, I'm not a fan of it. I'm an extreme fan of the spoof movies. I think all of us were during that time too, is, like, spoof was such a big thing. It was all over YouTube doing video spoofs, and then it was, like, movie spoofs of, like, all movies together, and
Oh,
then
there
they
was
started
so
doing
many
it
things,
was
like, the
great, it
whole
was
the whole
great.
spoof aspect was and it was about everything. Because remember, there was, like, scary
It's not
movies made fun of horror movies, you
yeah,
had the superhero movies that made fun
but
of them.
yeah, and the thing is, it's like the spoof movies would not hold up today. Not in a sense of like the jokes, anything, but like people, like the audience now don't really think spoof movies are as funny. And for some reason during this time, it was. And I think it's because it seemed like most of the horror movies were all the same. And that's why it is so
Correct.
laughable. Like it was always
It
a
did
zombie movie. It was always some girl getting killed first. It was always a cabin. It was, like there was just this level of like not scary, not
it's not
really
really
realistic.
it was just like it's like scary movies had become very complacent at this point,
Yes,
where
yes,
it
very
was
much
just a
so.
lot of the same redone gags, the same exact way someone would die. Oh, look, they're gonna all instead of going to the smart area, they're gonna run into the building with nothing but things hanging from the
Which
ceiling that
which
make
is
noise.
why I think the spoof movies were so successful, because us as an audience were like, "Yeah, these horror movies are just like that." And the Scary Movie franchise really honed into, like, every single detail of a scary movie, or, like, the Tucker and Dale versus Evil, that's so spot on, and Shaun of the Dead,
Yeah, I
so
think
spot
the
on, you
big
know?
thing about it and why it was so much better and why it was so
And us having the
accept
internet. Think about that
and
too.
why it was so widely acceptable was also because like it relied a lot on slapstick humor, which at that time everyone thought slapstick was like the funniest stuff ever. And if you look now, it's like you don't see a whole lot of slapstick anymore because people are just kind of like, well, we've seen that guy fall 30 times.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I said, and us having the internet, we became slowly desensitized to things that are graphic or and
Oh yeah, you just had
horrible.
to keep pushing the envelope in order for
Yeah,
anything to be
and see what you
scary.
can do. Yeah, it's
Because
crazy.
at that time, the internet was still very lawless. We talked about it in our internet episode about growing up on the internet. At this time, there was like nothing was unable to be seen, so you could, see actual horror
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, you can see more realistic things. And I think this is where we really fall off from something that goes from monsters to realistic scares and realistic to back to kind of monsters, like kind of slasher humanoid things. But also the during the 70s, 80s, it's more realistic as a realistic fear too because of all the serial killers, right?
Right, exactly. During that time, it was, you couldn't go anywhere without it being like, oh, there was a massacre over here. Oh, there's an active serial killer in 30 cities all at once. And oh, people are getting murdered while hitchhiking. So it made the horror genre so much easier to play into because they were just taking real life fears, changing a couple things about them, and boom, you've got a movie about it
Yeah,
now.
I think that's also where, you find the monster and realistic, fear put together, to where these people are kind of like I said, Freddy's kind of monster-esque, but he's still he's a humanoid, basically. Like, Halloween is this ultimate or yeah, Michael Myers is this ultimate humanoid, Jason's this ultimate humanoid, and then Freddy's this ultimate humanoid, but they all have the traits of, like, serial killers, a slasher, something that could get you if you're in a cabin by yourself or you're in a cabin with friends or you're in your home alone, which does play into the serial killer, uh, cult type killings that were going on at this time. So hate that it goes from that to something that relies so heavily on less practical effects and more on the CGI because it was so new, right? And then just
Yeah.
overloads the zombie genre, which is like for me, like I fucking hate zombie movies. I don't think they're good. I think they're
And
all
see,
pretty much
that's
the
where
same, you
that's where we
know?
differ. Like, I mean, we're both real big into slashers, but me more so than you, I think, in certain
No,
aspects.
I love slasher films. You're more into like the zombie
Well, see,
style
I
than
like
I
both, but like, it
It's just weird that it's like we had such these good, like, kind of story shifts, and then it turns into well, technically, it would be a realistic fear because it could be some virus overcoming the entire world, and
exactly,
yeah, like, I
exactly.
understand that, and like I said, Resident Evil does a really good job on detailing that, but, like, the rest of the zombie things in general, like, especially when it comes to, like, The Walking Dead show, I never really got into that at all,
I
but
never got into that
it
either.
was,
I
like,
could not
huge.
stand it.
Everyone
Well,
loved it, you know?
everyone
Like,
liked
it
it.
just
I watched maybe a season worth over the however many seasons there actually are, and it seemed like every single thing was the exact same thing over and over and over
yeah,
again.
that's what I'm
They
saying,
get a
yeah.
bunch of people together, they get a nice little base
You
going,
fall
they're
in love with the
surviving,
characters.
they're doing good, then someone does one dumbass decision and boom, the entire place gets swarmed. Some people die in the swarm, some people get out, then they just find another place, and it just keeps repeating the entirety of that fucking show until the end when everyone's basically just dead. And it's like,
Exactly.
you drug this out for 12 fucking years and
Exactly.
you
And
got nothing to
I
show
will
but the same
say,
story.
not only is The Last of Us game was absolutely amazing, I've played both and
The
watched
Last
them
of Us
when
was it is an exception because that is a
hang
very good.
on. The Last of Us game, when it came out in 2012, that was still around this era of Walking Dead stuff and a bunch of zombie things coming out as well. Like we're still in that time frame. But that was just the video game. So it's in the video game culture along with the Resident Evil stuff and remasters and everything. But then you recently had The Last of Us getting made into an actual TV show, and it was done just like the game because the game is not overwhelming with human looking zombies. It's
No,
a
it's zombies that are actually supposed to look like
it's a
zombies.
whole mushroom colony thing. Like it holds up so well compared to a lot of these other zombie things is what I'm saying. Like it has a difference. That's a huge difference, you know? Rather than it just being like, "Oh, someone has a thing and then they're infected and then that's it." Like at least there's more detail to it. And I think The Last of Us was really well done. I think the next season is going to be incredible. I think Last of Us season 1 episode 3 actually ripped out my entire heart and tore to pieces and lit my body on fire and made me cry so hard. I've never cried that hard my entire life. It was so fucking good. Anyways, I digress. I don't like zombie movies too much. That's
The
the
Last of
takeaway.
Us is an exception.
The Last of Us is accepted. But the fact that during this time it was that's all we saw. All horror films. That's all we saw. In the present day, the state of the horror industry is hotly contested. With the genre seemingly relying on churning out remakes, reboots, and endless sequels, many argue it's languishing in the doldrums once again with little originality to offer a modern audience. The resurgence of torture porn is also derided as a subgenre, having come back into the fore in the wake of the 2000 Saw and Hostel franchises, with no sign of slowing down. On the other hand, glimmers of hope shine through with examples of extreme originality and artistry. Cabin in the Woods in 2012 has been heralded as these decades' scream, and the recent releases of The Babadook and A Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night, both in 2014, breathes a new life into the genre. Jordan Peele, writer, producer, and actor, rose as the new king of horror with original films including 2017 Get Out, 2019's Us, and 2022's Nope, which all have been incredible. Like, he knew what he was doing when he wrote these, when he produced them, when he created every single fucking element. He is such a horror fan as well. So it's so lovely to see somebody who is such a big fan of horror dive into a creating aspect and to be able to produce three incredible stories that not only are kind of are scary, but they are psychologically
They're psychological
deep,
thrillers, and
deep,
it's also why
deep
they're all
thinking
three of
pieces.
those are in my top of all
Yeah, for
time.
sure.
They're very
They're
very
just
good.
deep thinking pieces. It's amazing. We have A24 Productions. If you guys don't know, that's the A24 has been around for a while, but A24 is this company, especially now that has been whipping out movies like Pearl, X, um, the two couple new ones that like it pretty much
They
almost
did anything or everything everywhere all at once. They did that one.
yes. They've done the Righteous Gemstones. Anything like
They're
any
really
of
good.
yeah, anything,
Really high budget production company.
but also staying strict to making sure it has good stories and it's not stupid or dumb. I think this company is amazing. So they're creating endless works of art that can relate to the older 70s and 80s style films with a mix of modern age. And I think that's why I like them so much is because of that. They just do such a great job at molding both uh
Both
both
styles, like you have
yeah, both
part of
styles.
the
Yeah.
old style mixed with
Oh,
the new style.
it's just it meshes so well together and it's not overdone on any length. It's like the perfect balance. And some movies that try to recreate that are just flops, but they
Some of
do
them
so well
just
on
they reach really high and it's just like it goes on
it
deaf ears.
sucks. Yeah. With perhaps more subgenres than any other branch of fictional filmmaking, it's difficult to see how anyone could expand or advance on anything that has come before in cinematic horror, which is very true. The fact that people can take small pieces of work without overdoing it, without recreating the same boring storyline, or try to turn out these fucking sequels that are dog shit.
Yeah, and like it's so wild because we have all of these different subgenres and it's like why are you still doing the same thing that someone else did 30 years ago? Like
Yeah.
come on, do something you can do better, I promise.
With such a popularity, cult followings, and numerous brilliant works, one would think awards would be thrown towards these movies. However, that is just not the case. Every year, more and more people become disillusioned with the Academy Awards. And why wouldn't they? Throughout its 95 years, the process has become a transparent game of insider politics. Go figure.
Yeah,
But
who would
that,
thought?
yeah, exactly. But that doesn't stop people from hoping for the best and rooting for their favorite films. For horror fans, that hope often crumbles away into disappointment. Since the first Academy Awards in 1929, only 6 horror films have ever even been nominated for Best Picture.
Six, count it up, six now.
And those are The Exorcist, Jaws, The Silence of the Lambs, The Sixth Sense, Black Swan, and Jordan Peele's Get Out. 6 since 1929.
And of those six, only like a couple of them I'd be like, yeah, that I could see that being best
Here we
picture.
go. Here we go. The Silence of the Lambs is the only film that ever took home the title.
As it should.
1 in 6 since 1929. That's insane.
Well, at least the one that did take it home is arguably one
Oh,
of the greatest of all time
it's my
movies.
favorite. It's my favorite movie of all time. I fucking love that movie. For years, the horror genre has been dismissed as silly slasher and gore porn. While it's hard to deny films like that do exist within the genre, is there any genre that exists without its frivolous films? Horror is a force of social commentary, a mirror that reflects back to not only our fears, but our flaws. Since it's a genre known for taking some of the biggest chances, you'd think it would get rewarded more often. Not as heinously snubbed as some of the other films that are on this list. For example, Psycho was actually nominated in 4 categories at the 33rd Academy Awards: Best Director, Best Supporting Actress, Best Art Direction for Black and White Film, and Best Cinematography for a Black and White Film. Today, the film has cemented itself as a classic. Everyone knows the story of the motel run by the Deadly's mama's boy, Norman Bates. It's a film that is referenced not only across the several horror films, but across films in every genre imaginable. It's shocking to think that a film that's become such a cultural cornerstone wasn't even nominated for Best Picture. It's even more shocking to think that it's lost every single category it was nominated for, especially Best Director, which obviously was Alfred Hitchcock who did it. Isn't that just it's insane?
Yeah, how one of the
The most
greatest
iconic yeah,
horror directors ever
the
didn't even win for it.
not even that, but one of the most iconic horror movies. It is
Yeah.
number 1 on almost everyone's list of just Psycho because it's the original. It's the knife in the. If you guys don't know what Psycho is, it's that scene in the bathroom where she moves the curtain and goes eat, 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 eat with the fucking knife. Like that's the little tiny clip that you see in like, for example, like I said, in every genre. It's some sort of plate on that, or even
Yeah,
just the
there's
camera.
always an homage to it, just in
God,
like
it's so dumb.
so many slasher films.
But, however, the film was a bit too morally taboo for the time period, and in the end, the film didn't need the accolades to become a masterpiece of legend. Other pieces like Hereditary, Sixth Sense, The Others, Pearl, The Shining, and Nope also got snubbed from wins as well.
Horror movie fans couldn't care less. By and large, the horror movie fan wants two expectations met: scariness and gore.
And that's accurate. That's so
Very much
accurate.
so, because like I don't really give a shit what it involves, but like even if it's like a really bad religious based like demonic possession movie or something like that,
If it's
if
got
I see
blood.
if I see somebody like get a head ripped off or get all their limbs ripped off, I'm like, huh, nice,
Cool.
and
And
it
and
does
we'll
it.
we'll definitely get into that more about when we talk about our favorite horror movies. We'll dive more into depth about that.
If the movie meets those expectations, then that movie is rewarded at the box office. To varying degrees, of course, films like The Conjuring succeeded with the horror movie fan because their lack of gore is more than made up by the effectiveness of its scares. It's said that horror movies are critic proof, and there is truth to that. As a genre, the horror film has a present group of fans that will see a horror film just because it's a horror film,
And this is
which
very true. This is so true.
we can give an attest for this 100% because we went and
So
saw the second Nun movie. Absolute shit. We were laughing our asses off 10 minutes into the movie because of how egregious and how stupid like
and
the gag elements and
it's
horror
it
elements were.
sucks. It sucks because The Conjuring and the Annabelle franchise or whatever you want to call the franchise, it's so well done in a lot of the other films. The only reason I wanted to watch The Nun 2 was because it's part of the franchise and The Nun was actually pretty good and I was like, "Oh my god, it's going to be so good." And most of the time when you're as a horror movie fan, you're not, like I said, talking about the critics. You're not looking at Rotten Tomatoes or anybody online to
Yeah,
tell you
because
what's
we don't
good.
care. It's a horror movie. We know it's
Not
either
even
going to
that
be
you don't
good or it's going to
care.
suck. There's no in between.
Not even that you don't care. It's like I don't trust people's opinions sometimes because some people
Yeah.
think some horror
Everyone's a
films
critic.
are really bad. Well, some
Yeah.
people think good horror films are really shit, and I'm like, what are you talking about?
Well,
And
yeah,
it
you
has
can
to do
sit
with
there and you can look at Roger and Ebert. They were like the two biggest like film critics, and half the time their takes on things were so bad that it's like,
not
why are you guys in charge of any kind of critics?
not even that, but as a horror fan and just a lover of movies in general, I like to look at the cinematography and I like to look at like the focal points of like the misdirection of oh they want you to look over here and something's gonna jump out over here and then you actually get scared because you're looking somewhere else to where they want you to look or you like it kind of is a mind fuckery of you're trying to not guess the movie but outplay the writing and the directing a little bit of like I think I know what's gonna happen and then you still get scared and that's really fun. But yeah, watching The Nun 2 was such a disappointment. It was so bad. Highly do not recommend. I thought the story-ish was decent, but I thought it wasn't as dark as the first one. It wasn't as scary as the first one. It just was like it sucked. It sucked.
Yeah, it was just really bad. Whether it's actually good on a technical level, or the acting is brilliant, or the script is killer, no pun intended, is largely irrelevant. Therefore, any awards are irrelevant by default.
Truth.
Can, yeah, whenever you don't care about any of that stuff
You're
at
making it for the
all,
fans.
yeah, it's for the fans. That's 100% it.
Always for the fans.
Conventional films don't have that same base to launch from, and are much more susceptible to critic or peer reviews. It's arguably why studios push for franchises, in an attempt to mimic the baseline of a horror film by getting moviegoers attached to the next franchise project. But even that isn't foolproof.
Which just shows that we went and watched The Nun because it's part of the
Yep.
Conjuring
We
franchise.
watched a series, and time again, I've said it once, I've said it again. Anything after 3 is gonna suck, and 2 and 3 arguably will suck as well.
Yeah.
The difference becomes obvious when one looks at how studios promote horror films over conventional films. To push a normal movie, studios weigh heavily on things like critic reviews, award nominations, who all's in the film, and even who made the damn thing. Often as flying text interspersed with scenes from the film. Horror films, on the other hand, push how scary or how bloody the movie is, speaking to the expectations of the fan base as described above. The goal, then of a horror movie director isn't prestige, but how effective they can be in scaring the living shit out of you. The glaring truth is that Hollywood, and more specifically the Academy, big ol' air quotes on that one.
The Academy. The fucking 4 white straight men that fucking dictate everything.
Yeah,
Jesus.
them and their just awful takes because people paid a
Awful
lot of money for
shit
it.
ass. Oh, yeah. Fuck the Academy.
Have conditioned the fans and creators of horror movies to keep awards and box office mutually exclusive.
Which is so stupid. It depends on how much fucking money you make, and then you get all the awards. I think that's so fucking dumb. I think it's so dumb.
One can't base the success of a horror movie on how many awards it's nominated for or how many it wins because history has overwhelmingly proven that even classics of the genre are repeatedly overlooked. Which,
Just
again, like we said earlier, only 6 times have we ever been nominated
and
at all,
one won. One
and
win.
we've won one. In one category, we've won
Who's
one.
who's we? Who's we? Stoney's been doing this thing to me, like, when I'm talking about football or, like,
When she talks
teams,
about sports teams,
and I'll
she's
be
like,
like I
"Yeah,
was like,
we are doing really good." I was like, "Who the fuck is this we were talking about?"
"Are you out there strapping up
I
a
was like,
jersey on the
yeah, I was
field?"
like, "Oh, you putting your pads on, you going out there and you scoring touchdowns? Is that what we are doing?"
So every time he says "we," I make fun of him now too.
Why
Who's
put the
we?
time?
Sorry, who's we? Are you a horror director, Jordan Peele? Oh my god.
Why put the time and energy into crafting an Oscar-worthy horror film when there's only the slightest chance it would even be nominated, if acknowledged at all?
Truth.
It becomes more worthwhile for horror movie creators to see if they can find a premise that results in an even higher box office return. The Blair Witch Project, the granddaddy of found footage horror films, made $245 million off of a $60,000 budget.
Just absolutely that's absolutely insane.
That's a
Absolutely.
return of 408,000%.
That's
We're talking
so
about
crazy.
a budget so low that a couple people and a couple extras and a little bit of equipment made so much
Made
fucking
a
money that
homemade
they,
movie that everyone thought was real, so it scared everyone into watching it. 'Cause
yeah,
that was the big thing too, is everyone thought the Blair Witch Project was real, like, actually was
yeah,
a
they
real
thought it was
happened.
an actual
Because
thing.
because of the found footage style it was shot in, which is why other movies like Paranormal Activity did so well, in theaters and their, like, sequels did well, is because of the shooting style, and
Yeah.
it all thanks to Blair Witch Project. Fucking 245,000,000. That's
Yeah, they made
insane.
one movie for less than a house cost, and they
Less than
can never have to work
a
ever again if
truck.
they didn't want to.
Cost a
Yeah,
truck.
it costs the amount of a truck nowadays. A modern, a 2023 truck is how much they put
200
into a movie, and now they have more money than they
That's
know what to do
insane.
with.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's a best case scenario where the combination of a new premise and scariness catapulted the film over and above its peers at the box office. Worst case scenario, you're easily making your budget back and probably a fuck ton more.
Which also goes back to the horror films are gonna do what horror films are gonna do. They're gonna be horror. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Like I said, we wouldn't watch it because of just it was a horror movie, 1, but 2 was part of the franchise. So when you have those 2 things interlocked together, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, horror fans are gonna go watch these movies because it's horror. Good or bad, we and they will be the judge of it. The films can be watched year-round and heightened during the fall months, especially in October.
Ooh, in
So
spooky season.
so why waste your time on a critic-raved rom-coms starring picture-perfect actors confessing their loves to each other in some scripted make-believe bullshit when you can see a mentally troubled 7-foot-tall humanoid mama's boy killing innocent campers by a crystal lake? The choice is truly up to you.
And with that,
Did did you like my little writing on that?
I did. That was
I
that
wrote
was that was that
I
was
wrote that
pretty.
really
Real
well.
pretty. Real
Thank
pretty.
you. I
You
wrote
you
this whole
wrote
paragraph.
you read it real good.
I
You
read
read
it real
it
good.
read it goodly.
Well, I wrote this whole last paragraph, and I was like, I really like that last sentence, so I wanted to be able to say it.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah, it's pretty.
We know.
Okay, now you can transition.
All right, everyone clap. Everyone clap for
Yay,
Conway.
we did it!
Wow.
We did it. We gave you a brief history of horror movies. So
With
now's the
all
time.
with all that being said,
Now's the time in the program where we
now's
switch
the
over.
time where we're gonna talk about what we like. And again, this is in no particular order. We actually it took us, I don't know, probably a good 30, 45 minutes to come
I
up
would
with
say an
this.
hour
Yeah,
because we
okay,
came up
probably
with a
about an hour.
fake
And it
list.
was mainly on mine.
Mine,
It was
mine.
it was mainly on my side of things because I am not the most avid horror fan. I do appreciate some horror movies, but Conway is definitely more of the horror fan than I am.
Let's be real though. Trying to put a list into anything that we like is
Yes.
really, especially
Regardless
movies.
of horror, but especially movies.
We are
It's like
such
trying to ask
cinephiles.
us who's your favorite artist.
Yeah.
In what category, in what way, in what subgenre? Maybe then I can narrow it
Because
down to 5 people.
because we are such cinephiles, I mean, this goes with anything. Making a list is really hard because it depends on what our mood is. Have we seen the movie recently or not? Is it some movie we've seen too many times that kind of lost the luster of it? Is it the environment of where we watched the movie for the first time and then you watch it again and you're like, oh, that's not as good because you're not in a movie theater full of people screaming? Like there's just so much like different things that contribute to this list. So it took us a lot longer. I mean, mine was a little pretty easier, but it took a
Yeah,
lot longer.
you got
Tony,
yours figured out pretty quick.
Tony listed like 30 movies, and then I was like, we have to narrow it down to at least 10.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
originally she said, "What are your top 5 horror movies?" And I was like,
And then
"Fuck,
you're like,
I
I
don't
can't do
know."
that.
I was like, "I can't do that." And then she's like, "Okay, well, let's just start naming them and we'll work it down." I was like, "Here's
so,
a bunch and we'll go with 10."
so
So,
like I said, these
mind
are not.
you, none of this is in any order, and I'm gonna say things like in my first spot. That just means the first one I have on this little chart we made, okay? Because
And
I can't decide anything, so that's not in order. That's just how I read.
And also, we're gonna be explaining why, so you guys
A
aren't
little
just
bit
like,
about
"Huh."
each
And
reason.
we are so open to y'all judging us for the choices. That's totally fine too. Everyone has their opinions on choices, especially when it comes to horror movies. And I know the fan base is crazy on each particular horror movie. So we might be leaving some really good ones out, and then later, like a week later, I'm probably gonna listen to this episode back and be like, "Fuck, I should have changed my answer to this." So on our list, we have 10 traditional horror, slasher, scary, Halloweeny, whatever you want to put them in, movies. And then at the very end, we have a bonus one for our favorite spoof movie, which we
Yes.
both are really big spoof fans. So had to
Also,
include
big
those.
comedy nerds,
So
so
had to
you'll see
include it.
why the choices we
Had to
made and why
include
we
it.
put them there.
But yeah, we will be explaining.
Actually,
Stoney, if you want to
for
go first.
for reference real quick, and this is just because I know there's gonna be one of you little fuckers out there. There's one on here that might be considered a spoof/comedy horror film. It's not. Go fuck yourself. This is my list, not yours. Make
You'll
your
get
own.
that in. Okay, Stoney. Please go first and
So
tell
for my first slot,
your first slot. You slot.
my first slot on
Slut.
my
Your first
charterino here.
your first slut.
My first little bullet here. I couldn't decide which one
Hang on.
specifically.
Back up, Mike. Back up.
In my first slot, I couldn't decide which one of these movies by this director that I could choose from because realistically, my first choice is just anything Jordan Peele has made because all of them are fucking fantastic. So I couldn't decide. So fuck you again. My list, not yours. All 3 of his horror movies are up there. So Get Out, Us, and Nope are all there because they're all great, and that's my reasoning.
And you originally weren't a fan of Jordan Peele's movies yet
Well, it's
because
not I
you
wasn't a
didn't want to get
fan,
in.
it's I had
You
never
didn't want to get
watched any
into
of
him,
them.
yeah.
I
And then
had no desire to before we got together,
yeah,
and then we
you
started
didn't find that
watching them.
appealing. And
Yeah.
then
And then I watched all of them in, like, 2 days.
yes, when he got with me, I made him sit down. I said, "No, these are really good. These are gonna mind fuck you. These are so deep thinking movies. I know you don't like scary movies, but I promise you'll like these." And obviously, they're in his tops.
And honestly, out of that, I
Out of the
think
three,
out of the 3, I still think Us is probably my top just because of
it's deep. How
how fucky it
crazy?
is, and ho
How
like, just even the
crazy?
concept of it is so bizarre.
The mirrored shadow people, in a sense.
Yeah,
It's
but
so
they're
fucked.
direct opposite of your
Yep,
personality.
it's
They're fucking
so
terrifying.
fucked. That's so
What do you got in your first slot?
So in my little slot, I have 2008 because I know this is a remake of a movie, but I think the 2008 is really good. 2008's The Strangers. And let me explain why. One, I'm terrified and have a deep-rooted fear in breaking and enterings or house evasions. Um a scary fear for a lot of people, so I'm not alone. Like, I know that's a really big base fear. And it also kind of falls into a cult-like aspect because you have these 3 people that are coming in to murder you in these crazy masks, and you're in this house in the middle of the woods, and at this time, that's kinda where I lived. So, I felt like this movie was really accurate and relatable to me, and it was genuinely scary, and I think the scenes that, like I said, watching this as a child pretty much, as a, middle schooler, um, the scenes that stick out is the way they were able to get the windows to be so dark from the inside out to where you can't really see anything looking out. Is also really scary. Like big giant open windows in forests scare the hell out of me because it's like, why, why do you need that for one? You turn an outside light on and there can be anything standing there. Um, but I loved the cinematography work of it too, is the fact that they made it from not only the victims' POVs, but they were really honing into, like, standing from the outside of the house a lot, and I just think that really dives into a
Yeah,
crazy
it's a
fear,
more realistic
a realistic
horror
fear
movie
base.
because
It
that
was
is
great.
100% something that could
It's very
happen.
s yeah, it's very scary, and like I said, it goes into, like, the Manson kinda cult vibes, going in and killing people together, dressed as you know what I mean, like, for a reason. It and then they recently made a second one, and I still think the second one's pretty good as well, like, the sequel is pretty good, but that first one just really gets the scares.
In my next slot, I've got another one that's not necessarily a specific movie, but just by saying the name, you guys will know
Franchise.
exactly what I'm talking about. But Hellraiser.
Hellraiser's
Hellraiser
so good.
is so good because it's so the concept of it alone is so off the wall. I mean, the fact that you created an entire universe about beings that love pleasure and pain so much that they
So
inflict it,
kinky.
but don't know the difference between the two because they're so hedonistic.
Not
And
even that, I
it's
think it's
just
sorry.
it's just such a bizarre concept, and like the fact that it spawned like this entire sub series from the original, and then you start getting into like Pinhead and stuff like that, and it's like some of the scenes in it are very gruesome, but also very like cinematic at the same time. And it's like it's what I say like good horror should be. Like it's you've got scenes of like real high tension, and then you've got like some scenes of brutality all at the same time.
And it also is the era of the practical effects. I think
Yes.
the practical effects and the makeup and the
Yeah, like
special
shooting
effects.
needles through people.
Yeah, but not even like the makeup uh characterization, like how they created Pinhead to look like that. Like I just think it's such a beautiful monster creation. I love the whole special effects and makeup departments in horror films cuz they're always so fucking cool. Moving on to my second choice, not in order. Again, repeating this.
We don't have to say that again. We've
I
already
will
stated
say,
enough.
however, this is a very big top. It is at least top 5 for me, easily, is the 1996 Scream. A lot of people fucking hate this movie, but it also is a cult classic. I absolutely love it because I love the casting in the movie. I think it is so well done, and each person fills the character's shoes, amazingly.
You
I
just love
love
how Drew Barrymore is such a bimbo in this movie.
I love Drew Barrymore as Casey Becker. I think Courtney Cox playing in it is so good. I think Matthew Lillard kills any horror movie, let's be fucking real. But I just love, like I said, I love the slasher films, and Scream gave me, because all the Screams now, and I've seen the Scream TV show, I've seen all the Screams after this. I think like Scream 2 holds up pretty well, but not as well as the first one. But all the other, like, new remakes of Scream, I think are, like, awful. I think they're so dumb and stupid. But
Yeah, like this
this
new one that just came
Scream
out was really,
yeah.
really dumb.
This Scream is so good because of the practical effects, because of who's in it, for one. It is just a classic. But I love the way that it does feel like an 80s slasher film, even though it was in the late 90s, you know? Like, it gives me
Well,
a hint of taste, a little tiny taste of 80s slasher.
yeah,
That's
and
why
I
Scream's
know
in my
one of
top.
your favorite
Hang
specifics.
on, we're not gonna get there. You're gonna mess up my order. That's where we're going with that. All right, Stoney, give me another one.
So this next category, surprise, surprise, we have something very similar because we like a lot of the same stuff, but we have the exact same franchise. Two different adaptations of it.
Yep, yep, yep.
Mine more on the newer spectrum. Hers is the original, but the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Hell
Mine
yeah.
specifically from the year 2003.
And why the 2003
Because it's the very
choice?
first Texas Chainsaw Massacre I ever saw. It's what
Okay.
I believe, if I'm thinking about it, I think it's one of the first like actual scary movies I ever saw.
Slasher style kind
Yeah,
of.
it was definitely the
Okay.
first slasher, but I do know like that, and then I think the first like actual horror movie I ever saw, I want to say was Butterfly Effect. But
Butterfly
I
Effect
don't
fucked me
remember
up.
which one came out first. But
Butterfly
I
Effect fucked me up.
that movie fucked me up
It
too.
fucked with my brain, man.
Yes, it is a very psychological
Oh.
thriller, but I'm
Anyways,
sure if we
anyways.
watched it now, it wouldn't hold up. But
No,
anyway,
it still
back
holds
to
up.
the one we're talking about, the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The reason why, not only it being the very first like horror movie I can remember seeing, it terrified the living shit out of me, but also there's a very, very, very specific scene. It is like in the first 5 minutes of the movie. They pick up a hitchhiker. Hitchhiker tells them something's fucked up. She pulls out a gun and literally blows her head out in the middle of this fucking car as they're driving down the road. And they just lose their shit. And then the movie just keeps going from that point on. And it's constant blood, constant gore, just a massive amount
Your
of
other
violence.
reason
It
for
is,
liking it is
oh, duh, because of who's in it.
who's in it.
Jessica Biel.
It's the only reason Stoney likes
Because
it
she
too.
plays the hot girl.
It's the only other reason you like it so much.
So now that they know mine, which
On
Texas
the
Chainsaw
other
Massacre is yours?
on the other end of the spectrum here is my choice is the original 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And the reason I mean, I'm more for originals in general because I think they just hold up way better than most of the remakes. Some of the remakes are really good, but I still like the 74. I do enjoy the 2003. I do think it is really good. And side note, the new Leatherface movie that kind of came out recently is about this main character as a kid growing up in the like chainsaw household and how he became the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is really cool. It's a really cool perspective. Highly recommend watching it. It's on HBO Max. It's called Leatherface. Anyways, I like the original because not only was this one of the first slasher films really to be put on a giant scale, it was based on a true story. The original is so much more gory than the remakes have been. I think the practical effects on this are so much better. I think the camera work is absolutely phenomenal because you got to think if they're doing a chasing scene, you have somebody have a camera strapped to them running down this dirt road chasing after the victim to make it look like the killer's POV. I think the sex scenes in it are way better. I think the 70s vibe of the movie really pairs well with the time of the release of this movie, obviously, compared to the remakes. So that is why I am such an original girly anyways, but like when it comes to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this is one of my favorites that I used to watch this so many times as a kid. I was shown the original before any of the remakes anyways. So like this that's also why it kind of affects my choices of originals is because I didn't see a remake then watch the original. I watched the originals and watched the remakes. Which has a huge difference on people because some people will not enjoy the originals because they've seen the remakes first and they're like, "Well, that's not how this happens." And it just has it's just your perspective on movies in general, you know? Um but this movie was a movie I watched prominently as a child. We watched it every Halloween. No cover in the eyes, just enjoying the artistry of it and all things horror and gore.
For my next category, well, I keep saying category. My next block, I have a
And don't say
movie.
my next block because you just said it twice in a row. Say on to another choice.
Another one of my choices, and this movie scared the fuck out of me.
I think it's a good
Uh,
movie too.
I think honestly, this is one of the best horror movies of the 2010s. It's Sinister, and if any of you have not seen this movie,
With Ethan Hawke.
Okay, I don't care about who's in this one at all. I'm just gonna be honest with you. This one
Ethan
is
Hawke's
not
the
about
best.
who's in it remotely for me at all. This is purely for the fear because this movie is honestly just fear-inducing. I remember the first time I saw it, it scared the shit out of me because it something about the way that all the brutal murder scenes are done.
With the
The fact
projector?
Yes, the fact that it's on a
Oh,
projector and the fact that you come to find out that it's all the kids that end up getting possessed are the ones recording their entire family being destroyed.
fuck
It
me
is
up.
fucking terrifying. And
Dude, the
there's this
projector's
one scene
moving?
with the lawnmower, and then there's the
Yes!
one where they all hang, and then
Yes!
they drown all of them. They get set on fire in a
Yep,
car. It
yep.
is fucking terrifying. And then the absolute worst part of this entire movie, after you're getting just put through the ringer for like almost 2 hours straight. You think, okay, the movie's over, finally over. There's a final scene, and the movie's panning out, and all it is in the attic, and then the motherfucker's face pops up right before the credits show, and it scared the ever living fuck out of me
We
because
need to rewatch it.
oh my god, dude, that movie got me so hard the
We
first
need
time
to
I
rewatch
saw it.
it.
It terrified the shit out of
I
me.
think it's good. I think the demonic monster creation was really cool. Like, I think that's a
Yes.
cool character as well. It's very
Yes.
unique, a very
It
unique
it
style.
also scared me because the first time I watched it in
Projectors
a
freaked me out for a
I
while watching
watched
that
it in a
too.
house that we actually thought was haunted,
Even
and
worse,
so it just made it even worse. It just terrified
even
the
worse,
shit out of me.
even worse. I think I also that after watching that too, I remember, like, projectors kind of scaring me for a while.
Yeah, I got afraid they'd fucking turn on and that fucker would just appear places
Ah,
because anything that has him becomes him.
you're
So it
at
could be a
school.
picture of him and he jumps out.
Yeah,
Fuck, it was terrifying.
you're at school and you're like, "Please, please, please, please,
No,
please."
see, the first time I watched this, I was out of high school at this point, but
Oh,
it
oh, I
fucking
watched it when it came
terrified.
out
No,
and
see,
we
I
ha
didn't. I saw it on DVD. Like
mm,
remember, I didn't really like horror
oh,
films, so I
movies.
never
Yeah, it
went to
took
the
you a
theaters
while.
to watch them.
Yeah.
Like it's
No,
never been
I
something
was
I've been
genuinely at
into.
school, and even though they had, like, smart boards and some classes did, and I still was just like, "Ooh, he's gonna be right on here. This is
Yeah.
so like, the
He's
next
gonna
day, it's so
he's gonna
scary."
he's gonna pop up on that right on vis-a-vis fucking overhead
It was a good
projector.
original movie story. It
It
was really
was.
good.
That's what it really
Good story.
was
It's a
because
good story.
again, 2010s also still suffering from that let's redo a billion things.
Yeah, exactly. Um, on to another original. My next is the 1984 version, an original version of The Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger, uh, crazy storyline. If you fall asleep, he's gonna come into your nightmares and kill you.
And
One,
then if you
two,
die in your
Freddy's
dream, you die in real life.
yeah, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. I used to know that whole fucking song. This is also another movie I watched as a child or just growing up in general that we watched every Halloween time. It was part of the kind of watch list along with like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is the originals. I do really, really, really thoroughly enjoy Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I don't remember when that one came out, but that one also is such a good adaptation as well. I really did think it was. I mean, Craven in general has some good movies, but I thought that was a really well done. It wasn't as gimmicky or stupid. It really held up. But I love once again the practical effects of the mask and how Freddy looked. I loved the bed scene where she's laying in the bed and he just stabs up through it with his
Oh no,
fucking knife
the one that
hands
fucked
and
me
it's
up,
everywhere. Oh, it's so
the one that
scary.
fucked me up was the guy in the waterbed.
Yeah,
Where
that's it. Where he
he's
just stabs
no,
and
no, he
oh,
doesn't
comes
just
out. Yeah,
stab.
he
He
gets
pull his
pulls.
fucking his hands come up with those fingers because that person's
Yeah,
laying there
and then
with
he
like
gets stormed and
I
it's
think they're sitting there with like a Walkman on or something. They have headphones, and
yeah,
so like the hands come up and just like grab him and pull him into the mattress.
drown him in the water. Yeah, it's crazy.
The first time I saw that, I was terrified to lay
Of
on beds for a
waterbeds.
hot minute.
After watching this for the first time, and I mean any other time I watched it, I was always terrified of going to sleep, which is the whole premise of the movie. Like, don't fall asleep; he's gonna be in your dreams. And I
Yeah.
love it. It's another '80s slasher film that just holds up. And like I said, also I love the theme too in these '80s slasher films is if you have sex, you die. So for the longest time, I figured out the running theme in movies is like if you have sex in a scary position,
You will die.
you will die. You're gonna die from these fucking monsters, and I think it's great. I think, like I said, I think the sex and the horror is such a it's like peanut butter and jelly, you know? Like it pairs so well together, and I love it. I love it in all the movies. It's great.
For my next one,
Another
I
great,
I
another
have
great.
I have an original from someone who's really great, one of the godfathers of horror, Mr. Stephen King, and it's the original in 1990 adaptation of his book It.
With one of the
This
best actors ever.
this fucking movie. This movie scared me beyond belief for one scene in particular. Not the Georgie come down here, not the I'm gonna eat you, not any of that stuff.
What scene was
The
it?
scene that terrified me more than anything, and I don't know why it did, but it fucking freaked the fuck out of me, is the blood balloon scene where they're inside of the library and all the balloons start popping and blood just starts going fucking everywhere. Don't know why. It's not necessarily a particularly brutal scene, but it terrified the fuck out of me.
Another
Because like
practical
during
effect.
the scene, the entire time, like all the adults and stuff, it's like they don't even notice what's going on. And so like there's like this one part where it's like a dude reading a paper and then the balloons pop and stuff like that, splattering blood all over the people. The guy and nobody pays attention to it. And it's like the weirdest like it's a very creepy scene for me.
And Tim Curry absolutely nailed the original It. I think
Pennywise?
yes, Pennywise I meant. He absolutely nailed Pennywise this because when you watch it as an adult, I mean, like all with all Tim Curry movies, you really like appreciate his acting style and the way that he can make a character a character. And you can't really compare it to the Skarsgård's version
Which
of Pennywise, which is still
which is a very
unbelievably good.
fucking good version of
It's
Pennywise. It's
so
just
good, it's
different.
so good, but Tim Curry makes it seem like a normal clown, and that's what's really scary because
Yeah,
normal
because
clowns freak
Pennywise
people out.
just seems like a normal, haha, it's just a random guy in a mask clown guy, but not a weird spider monster thing that feeds on children.
As in the newer ones, which the newer ones are still fucking fabulous. But I think also that Tim Curry brings that innocence to Pennywise in a sense. He makes him kind of la la la, but people are still terrified of clowns in general. So him even just being a la 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 clown, it still scares the fuck out of people because of the way
Yeah,
he
he
like
he he played the role
pronounces
very well.
words or he moves his face. Like he just it's it's so different compared to the new ones, and Skarsgård doing his fucking facial movements in the new ones is also fucking insane that he can do
Well,
that.
yeah, he's
He
also a
can
method
manipulate
actor, that's
yeah, he can
why.
manipulate his face, but I think both of them are very well done, but yes, the original is a chef's kiss I think because of Tim Curry, I will
What
agree
you
with
got
that.
next?
Mine is also unoriginal. It is the 1980 and the very first Friday the 13th with Jason Voorhees coming onto the big screens as an original slasher, as an original killer. I love the concept, how I mentioned kind of earlier when we ended our little brief history thing, the fact that it is this giant humanoid person that has these mommy issues that makes him go and kill these camps because he almost drowned or he drowned in the lake at a camp. I just love it. I think the costuming is amazing that he's stuck with a hockey mask and underneath is this wet zombie like face with little hair and he's this giant man with ripped up clothes and carrying this long machete because you know all killers have their iconic weapon. You have Nightmare on Elm Street, which is the hands, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface, which is the chainsaw. You have Michael Myers with the huge kitchen knife, and then you have Jason with the machete. They're all fucking iconic. But I also love it goes back to my love of 80s slasher films, but I loved the camp environment. Not only is the camp environment there, but it is campy in the, queerest of terms. I love the whole camp counselor vibes in the shorts and the ringer tees in bringing your friends out to have some fun by Crystal Lake in this camp. I love the fact that it also has the theme of you have sex, you die. And I loved the sex scenes too of just how intimate it'd be and then how you would always be like, okay, how is he going to kill them while they're in this position? And I couldn't imagine dying or getting stabbed with a giant machete through one person and out the other while someone's inside of me. Like, it's just such a mind fuck of shit. I think it's same thing with the practical effects. I think they're so cool. it goes back to also with the Lost Boys a little bit with the how the camera angles are a little gimmicky, but you kind of look over it compared to just how good and original the storyline is. But yeah, I think it's really funny that it's literally just this dude who has a bunch of mommy issues that go and kill a bunch of campers because that's the camp he died at and got made fun of and bullied. And you almost feel bad for Jason, so at the end of the time too. And that also goes back to the Freddy versus Jason that we talked about, where Freddy's literally drowning Jason, but Freddy's also scared of water, and Jason's scared of fire, or Freddy's scared of fire too. So it's like they're battling the elements, and I just think it's great. I think they're great.
For this next, hold on. This next one,
No, no, no.
again,
This one. Don't say that.
huh?
Just say another choice.
Another one on our list. No surprise, surprise. Same fucking franchise again. Who'da thunk? Uh,
A
we're
yeah, same creator.
well, no, not even same creator. This is the same franchise. This Your Choice is the sequel.
Of
Well, not
mine,
necessarily sequel. It's the
but relate.
continuation. It's the
But by
continuation.
somebody who makes amazing horror films.
And the only reason this is actually on here is specifically because it was made by Rob Zombie.
Because of Rob
I
Zombie.
have The House of a Thousand Corpses
Good choice.
as this choice.
Good choice.
For those of you that don't know, House of a Thousand Corpses is kind of can be considered a horror comedy because there are humor elements of it because it's written by Rob Zombie
Captain
and Rob
Spaulding,
Zombie.
man.
Rob Zombie does a lot of funny stuff. I mean, for fuck's sake, he has a character named Dr. Satan.
Yeah,
like,
it's
like
it's
it doesn't
it's
get much
good.
more funnier than that.
It's
Like
a good movie.
playing specifically on certain tropes that he finds laughable. But it's an entire movie about people trying to find this tree that Dr. Satan was hung from. They pick up a hitchhiker, end up in this house that turns out to be the House of a Thousand Corpses with this weird psychopathic murder family. But it's like really funny, but also really brutal at certain
Well
times.
done. It's a
It's
zombie film, you know?
it's real good.
A Rob Zombie film is done so well too. It's not cheesy. It's right on that border of like cheesy and not, you know?
Yep, and it leads directly into your choice for
My
this.
choice is to the 2005's Devil's Reject. I remember watching this movie when it came out. I was quite young, so probably shouldn't have watched it, but I did sneak to be able to watch it. And I've watched it many times as an adult and many times as a teenager. And I also am a huge fan of Rob Zombie, not only just his music, but his art that he produces as well, filmmaking being one of it. I think his wife is an amazing actress. I think they did really well in this movie as into it, and it played into another realistic fantasy of a trio of like cult like killings, and the brutality of it was amazing. I think also with the special effects mixed in with a little bit of CGI is brilliantly done. I think the blood and the gore and the anti anybody in this movie is so amazing. Hates everything, doesn't care, loves each other, but hates everybody else. I think it's
Yeah.
phenomenal.
That and just how many people can we kill?
This
That's
next
really
one,
what it boils down
yeah,
to.
this next one that Stoney picked, to me, before he tells you what it's about, if you know anything about Stoney, you know what he's about to say is the most spot on movie that Stoney could ever pick as a horror movie in his top faves, and he
Yes.
literally just watched it yesterday, and
No,
he was
I rewatched it because
rewatch it.
you had never
No,
seen
no,
it and I
no.
needed to show
No,
you this movie.
I've seen it, which is a long time since I seen it, and I didn't think it was as good, and it's the same thing that I was just like, "Okay." It's such a Stony movie, but
It's a
it
great
makes
fucking
it
movie.
makes me laugh because as we were watching it together, he was just giggling and laughing and just having a blast
It's
because
such a
it is
funny movie.
it's not even funny, but it's just so up your alley.
Okay, it's not okay, so this one also could technically be considered a horror comedy, which I don't care. It's my list. Go fuck yourself. Uh, it's called Dead Snow. It is a off the fucking wall movie because first off, it's only in Scandinavian.
It's a
Or
Scandinavian
it's sorry,
movie.
it's not in Scandinavian. It's in Norwegian. It is a Scandinavian horror film
Check.
about Nazi zombies.
Check. World War II stuff. Check. The
So
most perfect.
the whole premise of this entire movie is a group of medical students go to a cabin in like the mountains of Norway to stay in this like cabin for like a holiday. They go out there, they're having a good time. One of the people hasn't showed up. They're starting to get worried. Some random dude, because in every horror movie, there's always a random
Sketchy
foreboding
guy.
omen that's
Yeah.
like, "Ooh, don't go in those woods. Bad things happen in those woods." Every horror movie has that fucking guy,
Accurate.
girl, whatever. That trope is always in there. So of course they do it. They talk about, "Hey, this area was really bad with Nazis in World War II. There was a guy, he killed a bunch of people, wanted all this gold. The people fought back. The guy ran off into the forest with his battalion. These zombies come back, and they happen to be Nazi zombies because of this gold. And they
It's
have
just
the gold.
funny.
They don't know that it's the gold until later on in the story, but people start getting killed left and right in the most bizarre ways. My
And they are
favorite,
brutal. They are
they're very,
brutal.
very fucking brutal, but my absolute favorite is there's a scene where they're talking about don't go near the windows, and as this dude is telling them not to go near the windows, a zombie reaches both hands through a window, grabs him, puts its thumbs in his eye sockets, and literally rips his skull open in half, and his brain falls out right in front of like 8 people, and they just get splattered with blood. It is the funniest thing because they all just start screaming and they just look at it, look at the brain, look back at each other, and they don't know what the fuck to do. It
So
is one
what
of my favorite movies.
what makes this when I said such a Stony movie? Let me give you the list. Okay, Sony, just sit back. It's a Scandinavian flick. Check. A foreign film, quote unquote, check. It has to deal with it has to deal with World War II. Check. And it has the craziest gore in a movie I've ever seen in my entire life. Also check. Those are the 3 things that make just the perfect movie for Stony. But
Oh yeah.
not only the practical effects were really good, and I was complimenting to Stony. I was telling that the compliment of the movie is the fact that everything is in this pure white snow, and the blood and the accents of everything, it just pop way more.
Oh yeah,
It was
everyone's
so
wearing
beautifully done.
like winter clothes because they're again in the mountains in Norway and
Yeah,
it's
anyways,
torrentially snowing.
it pairs really well, and it's definitely a movie you should watch, if you're into that kinda stuff. If you're not into
Oh,
gore or blood, don't watch it at all.
yeah, don't watch it, but also one of the reasons it's such a good movie is it even talks about horror movies because like
Other horror movies,
the whole
yeah.
running joke about it is like, "Oh, well, we can't do that because that was an Evil Dead." And just like stuff like that, they reference horror
Break the
films,
fourth wall,
and
yeah.
it's like what real people would do if they were in this situation because they were like, "Well, in this horror movie this happened, so let's not do that."
On to the next choice, so we can kinda keep it rolling. My all-time favorite movie, all-time favorite horror movie, this one is my number 1.
This one could be a number 1 for you.
This is my number 1. What are you talking about? Could be. Is
No, I'm
my
saying
number
out
1.
of this list, this if this was in an order, this would be number 1.
Yes, that's what I just said. This is my number 1. This is my number 1 outside of horror films. This is my favorite movie ever. It is The Silence of the Lambs with Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, Sir Anthony Hopkins. And if you've seen it, you know fucking why. If you've seen it and you're like, why? There's a million reasons why. 1, it is lengthy as hell. 2, the acting is so phenomenal. The whole Hannibal Lecter made up murder series is absolutely phenomenal. Going over to Red Dragon and just Hannibal and it's just I can't rave it about enough, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because it just is. It's my number 1. It's my favorite movie ever. Absolutely amazing. That is all. Stony, your turn.
My next one is The Happening. Really good movie. Very terrifying because it is more a real scenario that could happen. Uh,
Psychologically fucking around kind of vibe.
yeah, it really did because like for the longest time I got afraid that plants would legitimately turn against humanity and make me kill myself.
Okay,
Like
Seymour.
that was a real fucking fear of mine like because you would never know. Like it's so realistic and you
Yeah.
would never know if it was happening until it started happening.
Yep.
Something about the one of the very first scenes when you see about it like people all getting to the edge of buildings and mass suicide all at the same time terrified the shit out of me.
This one I think a lot of you guys can relate on, especially if you grew up in the 2000s. Um It's such a this whole franchise, so I put it as the movies. This whole franchise plays on a lot of what ifs and heavily is a realistic anxiety inducing series. Any and all of the Final Destinations. I made sure to include that on the list because they are scary movies and psychological thrillers, but watching these as a child has really caused a lot of anxieties as an adult.
It's made a lot
Um,
of unnecessary trauma in our
a,
lives.
a lot of unnecessary fear, and I know a lot of you are gonna agree with me on it. It's a common thing for a lot of us that watched it growing up, or even just watched it as an adult. It really did prey on the slightest tiny anxieties. The most famous scene is most people will never drive behind log trucks.
I.e. me.
Um,
That's that one in pipe trucks or anything that's got anything
Yeah,
cylindrical that could come off.
that or people get scared of tanning beds. I
Yep.
know, like, the fear of the bridge, falling off a bridge into the water, that's,
Yep.
like, a huge fear for me and still is. Like, there's
Anything
just
hanging above my bed.
bed yeah, it's just, like, I could go into so much detail, but we're just gonna leave it at that. Like, it is an anxiety-inducing every single one of them, no matter how bad they are, like after you watch them, you're like, "Oh, fuck, that's something I
Yeah,
gotta think about
Final
now all the time."
Destination really created such a fucking undue amount of fear for a lot of people.
And a lot of it did. It's the anxiety. It gave you that's a movie I think should be in the top of all horror movies because it's not just a short lasting scare, it is a lifelong
Oh, you mean like the roller coaster scene and why I'm afraid to
you're get
ever put
stuck.
my arms up on
Yep.
a roller coaster
Yep.
because I
Or you're
already
gonna
am
get
tall?
yep, or you're gonna get stuck on a roller coaster, or you're gonna fly off,
Yep.
or you're gonna fall
Yep.
out.
Yep.
Yep.
All
Yep.
of those.
That's what I'm saying. This one wins, I would say, ultimate horror movies because of that reason. It's not just a one-time scare every time you watch it. It's a lifelong trauma. Trauma.
Next for me, surprise, surprise, it's another fucking zombie movie because I'm so original.
You like
And
zombie movies.
actually, and actually, it's not just one. It's technically two, but I put them together as one because there's only
They're
two of these
similar.
films,
Yeah.
and honestly, they are a direct. You have to watch them together
Both
because
are good. Both are great.
yeah, they're both great. But it's the 28 days later and 28 weeks later films. They're so good because the first one is so realistic of what would happen if a actual zombie outbreak happened. What would happen in the first 28 days of that outbreak, and then 28 weeks later does such a good depiction of so this is what it would look like 6 months
Longer
after.
term. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's so fucking good,
I
and
think it's really well done too.
the fact that you see like the story of like someone just randomly waking up to them, finding quote unquote salvation. Then you go into the next movie where it's all about the communities and everything like that. But the fact that they managed to show how well it would look, and they did it on such a small scale because they just used Britain. Like they
Yeah.
just used the country of England for it. And it is so well done. Like it is hands down one of my favorite zombie movies because it does such a good depiction of like real zombies that one have no
Realistic.
they have no humanoid aspect to them. They are purely just
Infected.
creatures trying to kill shit.
Yeah.
And because it's an
Agreed.
infection based one, I think that's also why it was so terrifying.
Agreed. Agreed. I agree on that. It's a good choice. I'm not into zombie films, but I do like those two. And Resident Evil, like I said earlier.
Speaking of
Like I said, and The Last of Us.
Conway, we started talking about this, and Conway went on a thing, and not we, but she watched the first two Resident Evils the other
Again, they're
night.
so good. The Nemesis and Resident Evil 2, I want to rip me apart in every way possible. Delicious, big ol' honking monster. Yum 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 yum. Anyways, on to another choice that I chose. This movie is so also very prominent to me. I think the casting is well done in this movie. I love the storyline. I think it's such a very well original, creative outlook. Is 13 Ghost. If you guys have never seen 13 Ghosts, I highly recommend it. It's not really a more of a demonic possession movie, so if you're not really into things like that, it just has to deal with ghosts and that aspect. It does have Matthew Lillard in it, so if you're a Matthew Lillard fan, you'll absolutely love this movie. I love the character monster creations in this movie. I
Oh yeah,
think
it's a
they are
it, the
so
idea
well
the
done.
premise is so good.
I think the each of the 13 ghosts, each individual ghost or ghost pairing is so beautifully done. I think the makeup artist paired with the effects of like what the ghost is going to look like or what the ghost is paired with or their storyline behind each ghost, which is what you learn in the movie, is so well done. My favorite is the naked lady, which is what they call her, and she's all pale white and she has all these slashes on her and she's just bloody and wet. I think that's such a good pairing. And then the jackal, kind of cage-faced monster, demonic looking thing is so cool. Like you'll just have to look them up. 13 Ghosts is amazing. Like I said, the story is great, the acting's great, the premise is great. It has a little bit of CGI, but it does do a lot of practical effects. And like I said, it is a very good original story. And on to the last choices on our things that we decided to include. What is your last one
For my last
before we get
one,
into our bonus one, our spoof one?
I picked another that was it was an original story. Um, And surprisingly for me, actually one that I was like, "Oh, okay, that I can vibe with this one," but it's because I'm not really big on like the possession style ones. Like that's not really something like I don't really care about like The Exorcist stuff like that.
You all
Never really my type of horror, but Insidious.
you also don't like
Um
any of the other Insidiouses either.
I
You
don't.
only like
Only the
this one.
first one. The very first one is the only one that I like, which I know kind of weird because everyone says, "Oh, well, the series is actually pretty good if you watch all." Yeah, but no. I only care about the very first one because
Yeah.
the very first one was genuinely terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh so many parts of that movie live in my head rent free. And I kind of wish it didn't, like the when they're having the conversation, the face pops
At the
up
dinner.
randomly, or whenever when they look at the fucking door for the first time and Tiptoe Through the Tulip starts playing. That song is always just in my head rent free now. If it gets too quiet ever and I start walking, it'll just start playing in my head and I get terrified
You get
sometimes.
nervous.
And I'm
I love
like,
that.
holy fuck, this is a movie that I haven't watched in 10 years. Why does this still affect me?
I love that for
But
you.
it had an impact. But that was actually a very good movie.
It's
Even
ca-
though it's all based on like possession and stuff like that, which I don't really care for much.
yeah.
It was a good film.
It's also fascinating, like I said, you do not enjoy the other ones. You know, you
I
just
don't.
you've seen some of the other ones, but you that first one
Yeah,
just you
because I feel like after the first one, it's all reaching.
it's the same thing you said earlier. After the first two, it's always usually bad.
Yeah,
I think
there's very few series that I can do that with. Resident Evil being one of them because they're all great. They're all
there's a
great because
million
they're all based
series
off
you
video
can do.
games.
Anyways.
What
Insidious.
about
Last
your
choice, huh?
last choice on this little list here we made?
My last choice is another franchise because I decided to group it in like the Final Destinations because, they're all based on the same thing, all with kind of the same storyline, right? You can't really pick one Final
Right, yeah,
Destination,
especially with
right?
Final Destination, it's the same movie just redone 8
Different things,
times.
yeah. The Saw franchise I had to include because it is such a prominent, iconic series in horror history. It is another way of thinking. A lot of it also falls into the fear anxieties like Final Destination does, except for it's the fear anxiety of if something happens like this, how am I going to escape?
Yep,
That's
there's
the
always choices.
that's the difference between the Final Destination where I talked about how it just feeds into your anxieties of like this is something I'm trying to avoid. This could happen. The Saw deals with this has happened. How are you going to get out of it? And every time people watch it, the first time they watch it, they're actually watching it and they're like, "Oh my god," because you don't know what's going to happen. The second
Right.
or the times after you watch them over and over, you think about, okay, how would I get out of this situation? How can I escape this situation? If that was me, what would you do? What would be your choices? And it is kind of a choose your own adventure in your own brain. When you're watching the movie, you're choosing your own adventure while watching these characters play out, right?
What I think was so well done about it is because remember, this is a movie series that got started in the mid 2000s.
Yes.
Like
Practical effects were still very
practical
much in
effects,
play.
it was a very simple concept
Yes.
executed
Kidnapped,
perfectly. You're
kidnapped,
kidnapped,
you
you're
have choices
trapped, you have a choice, make your
to
choice. Do
to
you
live or
live or
die.
do you die? Do
Yeah.
you live or do you let someone else die? Things like
And
that. Very simple black and white choices that aren't a black and white choice in any modern sense ever. And then also you have to take in the effect they did so well with it because they're marketing for it.
Oh, it
Like,
was
do you
amazing.
remember, like, all the, like, things that would pop up randomly? Like, they would do, publicity stunts and stuff about
Yeah,
it.
all with all horror films, but I think I'm
But
more
specifically the
excited.
Saw franchise, I think, did a very good job
Yes.
with it. And also, I don't know if it's a popular or unpopular opinion, but me personally, anything after the 3rd one sucked because the first 3 were all story driven and the rest were all kind of
Oh, that's
lackluster.
your opinion. I
Yeah,
think
that's my
all
opinion of it.
I think all the saws held up. And speaking of saws, I thought it'd be a good way to end on that is because I'm actually genuinely excited for the new Saw to see the new Saw. I am very excited to see the new Saw. I go and watch them every time they're out. I think they're so good, but I know that this one is going to be pretty good. Because it's been some years since they did another one, so I'm very much looking forward to it. And that's kind of the end of our list, but we're gonna give you a nice little bonus one before we go ahead and get off here because it is time to get off of here.
For
Um,
our honorable mentions,
our honorable mention, our spoof, our comedy horror movie of choice. Stoney, what is yours?
mine, all I gotta say is Tucker and Dale versus Evil. If you
It's
haven't
great.
seen it, go fucking watch it. It is fucking hysterical.
It's great. It's so great because it's also actually really good horror movie. Like
Yeah,
it's
and
just
it's in my opinion, it's how I would be if anything like this started happening around me. Like, what the fuck is going on?
yeah, it's a realistic adaptation of a horror movie, and I absolutely love it. It's also a zombie movie, so I get why you also
It's not a
chose
zombie
that.
movie. It's not a zombie
Yes
movie.
and
It's
no.
technically I don't know. I don't know how to describe what he is.
Anyways. So my choice is Scary Movie 2, and I
Specifically
say
Scary Movie 2.
specifically Scary Movie 2. It is such an iconic movie for me.
It's the best one.
It's the best one. Everyone will mostly agree it's the
It's
best
the
one.
absolute best one. The first one's okay, the 3rd one's great, but the 2nd, that is the best one out of the whole
It
series.
the bits in this movie, like the first one, they really laid down the line of like, this is a spoof movie. This is how we do things. We make fun of
Yeah.
all the scary movies. Then the second movie, this was Scary Movie 2, they really went all out. The bits are so fucking funny.
The bits are fucking
The
hysterical.
casting is also great. I think the comedy levels of for one, you have so many memorable moments. First,
Oh, so many references that
you
we
have
still
first,
use
hang on.
today.
You have everyone's favorite grab my strong hand, which is the crazy
Grab my
butler
strong hand.
mixing the mashed potatoes at dinner. You have the ghost fucking scene where she's fucking him. And that was for me as it like growing, I was like, I want a ghost to fuck me. I want a ghost to fuck me. Like I like, it was one of those things. You have that. You have the whole shorty getting rolled up as a fucking
That's a
blunt,
big old
getting smoked by a fucking
by a
uh
tree.
by a tree plant, which is like an ode to
Tree smoking trees.
yeah, it's an homage to Little Shop of Horrors. You have the ghosts in it. You have the butlers in it for Clue. Like you have the Scream. It's just every horror movie together. Anna Faris does an amazing job as always playing some ditzy dumb idiot, and it's so fun. But yeah, the bits and the sayings and that as a franchise as a whole is amazing. But Scary
And
Movie 2,
also, we can't
absolutely
forget the
great.
slapstick nature of Scary Movie 2
Yeah,
because that's
it's
in
great.
that time period where slapstick is everywhere.
Yeah, but yeah, spoof movies in general, Scary Movie 2 is top tier for me. And I think that's it. That's it with our list. We're gonna end it there. We got some other shit we need to do anyways, so
All right, so
we're
I'm gonna get out of here. Where can the good people find you, Conway?
no, no, no. Where can the good people find you, Stoney?
No, I asked you first.
No, that's not how we do things around here, and then everyone knows. Where can the good people find you?
They can find me everywhere at Stoney Robbins or Stoney Robbins _. If you can't figure it out typing it normally, well, figure it out and find a different way. What about you, Conway?
The good folks out there can find me at conwaytitty.com. That is conwaytitty.com. You can find me everywhere. You can catch us on stream. We will be watching October will be starting. Every week we do our stream sleepovers on the channel and in the Discord. Come watch some movies with us. We're starting out with obviously my favorites, Silence of the Lambs, Scream, and Scary Movie 2. Come watch those with us. Stoney will be there to watch them with you too, so that'll be super fun. That's on Twitch and Discord. Be sure to join. I appreciate you guys watching. Let us know your favorite horror movie and or spoof horror movie in the comments or message us privately if you're not a public person. That's fine too. We read them. But other than that, you guys take care. Happy Halloweeny season. Happy spooky season.
You
Much
said
more
weenie.
weenie. Much more fun episodes coming up at you. I hope you guys have a good rest of your night, day, wherever you are. Stay hydrated, get some sleep, and we'll see you later. All right. Bye-bye.